If I were the devil. If I were the Prince of Darkness, I would want to engulf the whole world in darkness. I'd have a third of its real estate and 4/5 of its population, but I would not be happy until I'd seized the ripest apple on the tree. Thee. So I would set about, however necessary, to take over the United States. I'd subvert the churches first, and I'd begin with a campaign of whispers. With the wisdom of a serpent, I would whisper to you as I whispered to Eve. Do as you please. To the young, I would whisper that the Bible is a myth. I would convince the children that man created God instead of the other way around. I'd convince, and I'd confide, that what's bad is good, and what's good is square. And the old, I would teach to pray after me, Our Father, which art in Washington. Then I'd get organized. I'd educate authors in how to make lurid literature exciting, so that anything else would appear dull and uninteresting. I'd peddle narcotics, to whom I could. I'd sell alcohol to ladies and gentlemen of distinction. I'd tranquilize the rest with pills. If I were the devil, I'd soon have families at war with themselves, churches at war with themselves, and nations at war with themselves, until each, in its turn, was consumed. And with promises of higher ratings, I'd have mesmerizing media fanning the flames. If I were the devil, I would encourage schools to refine young intellect, but neglect to discipline emotions, just let those run wild. And before you knew it, I'd have drug-sniffing dogs and metal detectors at every schoolhouse door. Within a decade, I'd have prisons overflowing and judges promoting pornography. Soon, I would evict God from the courthouse and the schoolhouse, and then from the houses of Congress. In his own churches, I would substitute psychology for religion and deify science. I'd lure priests and pastors into misusing boys and girls and church money. If I were the devil, I'd take from those who have and give to those who want, until I had killed the incentive of the ambitious. What'll you bet I couldn't get whole states to promote gambling as the way to get rich? I'd convince the young that marriage is old-fashioned, that swinging is more fun, and that what you see on television is the way to be. And thus, I could undress you in public, and lure you into bed with diseases, for which there are no cures. In other words, if I were the devil, I'd just keep right on doing what he's doing. This narration was done by radio personality Paul Harvey on April 3rd, 1965. Look at the political division in America now. Looks a heck of a lot to me like he was right about a lot of things, and with the devil, he's fulfilling many of his goals. The topic of my speech is freedom, and America has stood as a symbol of liberty to the rest of the world for over 200 years. And after the Civil War, liberty was indeed extended to all who lived within her boundaries. I say extended, it wasn't given until much later, but that's a discussion for another time. I wish to speak not about the liberties that we have, or that have been extended, but the liberties that we may lose if they are not carefully and jealously guarded and fought for. In the words of Ronald Reagan, freedom is a fragile thing, and is never more than one generation away from extinction. And there are 3 cardinal freedoms that I would like to discuss, and they are the freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, and religious liberty. For an example, I will direct you to post-World War II China under the dictatorship of Mao Zedong. After World War II, China fell into a bloody civil war, the likes of which killed 9 million of its own people. The Communist Party emerged victorious, with Mao as its ruler. A nation that had once harbored ideas of peace, compassion, humility, mercy, and individual development had been taken over by a party that would be responsible for upwards of 50 million deaths, with leaders who rose to power through lying, robbery, and murder. While the Western world was focused on Russia, China was undergoing a fundamental change Any unauthorized person owning any capital was tortured with hot irons until he or she confessed and gave up. Some were just killed, and their families were tortured whilst the graves of their ancestors were looted. Land was divided into tiny plots and distributed to any peasants that hadn't been caught up in the purge of millions. The people were always under watch. Should someone seeking the cover of darkness choose to hold a meeting with someone else, and if they were discovered, the two parties were arrested, tortured, sometimes killed. More often than not, killed or imprisoned. Prisons were packed, and revolts resulted in perpetrators being corralled and burned. In 1957, Mao introduced the 100 Flowers campaign, which encouraged people to speak freely and give their opinion of the government. This was a trick. All who were outspoken in their opposition to the regime were rounded up and imprisoned, somewhere between 400,000 and 700,000 people, including 10% of the well-educated classes. Others were branded as right-wingers. They were interrogated, re-educated, kicked from their homes, and shunned from their communities. They were given an illusion of having freedom to speak their minds, but no such liberty was really extended, and the people who spoke out were punished cruelly for it. In a power grab at farmlands and a push to industrialize a nation, Mao forced people to move from one part of the country to the other. Over 100,000 people were forced to move. Trade between communities was forbidden, all to promote self-sufficiency within the community. Millions did not have the tools nor the skills to work the land, and a famine ensued, which would last for years. Millions starved to death as they watched rice fields rot. Women could not conceive due to malnutrition. If any tried to escape the countryside and into a city where conditions were mildly better, they were shot at the gates. Unable to defend themselves and not permitted to own anything remotely similar to a weapon, deaths from hunger reached 50%, and no one could fight back. But of course, finally the time came to blame someone. But it could not be Mao, it could not be the Communist Party, surely. And so it's time to destroy the churches, for good, and initiate the Cultural Revolution. Christianity was banned. Temples of any other religions were barricaded and their monks expelled from them. The calendar was changed, opera was banned, and the Beijing Opera House costumes and sets were burned. No one was allowed any pets. The Red Book of Thoughts of Chairman Mao was to be read by everyone at the start of every day. Children in schools were taught that there is no God, there is only the government that will provide. At least they were a step above North Korea, where they are taught to worship their dictator. Another 1 to 3 million people would die in this time period. Rebels, or moderates, who were not deemed communist enough. With no faith in a higher authority, what was the point of resisting when you were met only with the oblivion of everything and everyone that you loved, and no hope of any heavenly peace? Such radical changes would take a long time to take effect in America. The Constitution ensures that. Unfortunately, it is the radical voices that cry the loudest. But as long as there are people that know what is in that document and are willing to stand for it, America will remain free. I encourage you to get familiar with the liberties that God intended for you to have and that are secured in this country by its Constitution. I encourage you, as a fellow American, to call upon lawmakers everywhere to remember their duty to protect, not limit, the rights of people, because there is no other country that will defend. Thank you.